65% of the Ontario population that voted did not vote for Doug Ford. But he is now in charge of everything. It doesn't make sense. Welcome to Bred in Captivity News, an unfiltered breakdown from a Canadian perspective. So we lost. As a province and as a country, we elected Ford again for the third time in a row with a majority government.
You had one job. Just the one?
It's an impressive win for the Conservative government because this is unprecedented, winning 3 times in a row. It hasn't happened in a long time. And it's shocking that it's happening now because we are living through a 7-year Ford government that has led to the worst living conditions that I could remember. Rent is at an all-time high. It's up 38% in this province. Homelessness is out of control. Encampments popping up all the time. Youth crime has exploded. Hospitals look like something out of a movie doomsday scenario with people getting treated in the hallways if they can even get treated at all. And we just put the guy that drove us into this clusterfuck back into the driver's seat. And it's maddening. People were really upset. I saw the reactions on Twitter. People were really unhappy with this. And the question keeps coming up, how? How and why? Ontario, you had one job, and it was to not bring Ford back. And how did we end up in this situation? There are a lot of reasons, but we're going to focus on 3 that I think are the main reasons we keep ending up with either a crappy provincial government or a crappy Conservative government or Liberal government. And those 3 things are a lack of voter turnout, and this time specifically, a lack of visibility from a clear opposition to Ford, and the fact that we have a messed up, rigged electoral system in this province and frankly in this country. And so let's start with the fact that there was a low voter turnout. That's not something that's new to Ontario. If you look back statistically, this might have actually been an increase in voter turnout than usual, which is saying something because this was also a really crappy voter turnout. About 40-something% of eligible Ontario's residents went to go vote. So let's start with the fact that there was very, very low voter turnout. As a population, nationally and provincially, we're not good at voting. We don't turn out to vote. I wonder about why that is a lot. And I think that things in Canada are often so normal, compared to America. Our entire existence is sort of just a comparison to America. And when you look at how bad things are over there, they don't have healthcare. We have healthcare. Their government is acting crazy. Their school shoot. You just pick. Things kind of just look normal here. And I think that kind of creates a complacency with our population that's just like, it's okay. I don't have to go vote. Things are pretty much okay. Another thing is there's not really a clear opposition this time around for sure to the Ford government. Doug Ford was all over the place. He was on TV. He was online. Bonnie Crombie, who was the leader of the Liberal Party, which was the only party that really stood a chance at beating the Conservatives, she was not a household name like Ford. And I didn't see her making a lot of ground to becoming a household name the way Ford was. So you see all of the horrible things that are happening that I listed. Add to that this new looming existential threat from the Pumpkin King himself, Donald Trump, talking about us being the 51st state, calling our prime minister a governor, and all sorts of incendiary, provocative stuff that he's been saying on Twitter. You have people looking for a leader in Ontario when the election time comes. And when you don't really know a name like Bonnie Crombie, which people don't, they know a name like Trudeau, they know a name like Mark Carney, but that's a federal election. We're talking about a provincial election here, and people know the name Doug Ford, for better or for worse. People know that name, and they need a leader in these times. I don't think that Bonnie Crombie rose to the occasion. And frankly, I think that the left should have come together to boost one person's image in this time. When Doug Ford called a snap election the way he did, let's not forget, we were supposed to have our provincial election in June, but Doug Ford called it early, knowing that the things that I'm mentioning right now were all going to work out to his favor. Was it really smart for there to be such a divided effort amongst the left? Because if you think about it, if you've watched the debate, it's clear if you consider politics like a spectrum, Doug Ford is on the right. Then you have like the Liberals in the middle, sometimes middle right. And then you have the NDP and the Green on the further left side. These three together should have recognized the threat that Doug Ford was and tried to boost one person's name to combat him. And that didn't happen. Our vote got split up. Everyone wanted to either vote against Doug Ford or finally stop voting Liberal. I mean, that's what I was hearing, right? If you don't know this about Canadian politics, almost every time the Liberal Party wins an election, they're winning because people are voting against the Conservatives and not really for the Liberals. There's famous letters that have gone viral in Canadian media about people writing letters to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying, you know, I didn't really vote for you. I voted against the other guys, but please don't screw me over anyway. That's been sort of a strategy. It's a crappy strategy, but fine, that is a strategy. When you have this guy calling a snap election, I would have liked to see that strategy come into play. Even I voted strategically. I voted for a Liberal because it did feel like if you voted NDP or Green, you were throwing your vote away. And I'm going to explain why it feels like that as well. I didn't really see that effort behind Bonnie Crombie, and that was really disappointing because the people didn't really have somebody else to put their faith behind in this time where it feels like we have an enemy on the southern border. So that covers in pretty much broad strokes what I think the low voter turnout was about historically, and also with examples for specifically what happened this time around. And of course, there's more to it than that, but I think those were some of the key factors. And then we move on to the fact that we have a broken / completely rigged electoral system. Broken because it doesn't work for the people. Rigged because it works for the people who know that it's broken and refuse to change it because it helps them. And that is the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. Because who is in charge of Canada at any given time? The Conservative Party or the Liberal Party? Sprinkling Bloc Québécois for Quebec once in a while, but other than that, it's usually the Conservative Party or the Liberal Party. Why is that? A few minutes ago, I mentioned that people cast their votes for the Liberals, usually not because they believe in Liberal policies, it's because they hate Conservative policies. And that's important. That's really, really, really important. The Liberals know that they have this power in their hand. And that's why they don't really have to do anything when they're in power, because they rely so much on our hatred for the Conservatives. But what's happening in recent times, the conditions that would have allowed for a complacent Liberal government, you know, the Canadian vibe that, you know, things are pretty much okay here, that doesn't exist anymore. People are feeling a strain like they have not felt in forever. And more importantly, they're feeling a hopelessness that they have not felt in forever. We're looking at a time where kids are graduating from school, getting jobs that are paying them $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year and still needing to live at home with their parents. This is not something that we've experienced before. This is not something that our parents were prepared to see because for all intents and purposes, if your kid matriculates through the educational system and then they get a high-paying job, and you know, $100,000 would have been considered a high-paying job at some point, and they still can't afford to rent, not to own, but to rent in this city, things are scary. And so complacency isn't going to cut it. And now the truth of the matter is revealing itself. We never liked the Liberals. We actually only liked what the farther left, NDP and Green, were forcing Liberals to do. I'll give you an example. CERB, C-E-R-B, the stimulus benefit package that went out to Canadians during the pandemic. Hugely popular amongst Canadian residents, right? At a time where there's so much uncertainty, where there's this pandemic going on, people are being told to stay in home. Some people have the luxury of a stay-at-home job, as I did at the time, but it was scary for people in my family and my friends who I know did not have the privilege to have a stay-at-home job. And then boom, in comes the government, $2,000 a month. And there's like a calm, there's a little bit of breathing room. It might not have been everything that everybody needed, but it was some breathing room. And that would not have happened if it weren't for the NDP. The Liberal government was in power at the time. It was Justin Trudeau's government that eventually rolled out that benefit package, but it was Jagmeet Singh who made him do it. I'll explain how. Trudeau had won a minority government. So in Canadian politics, you can win a majority government or a minority government. If you win a majority government, that basically means that you have enough power within your own party to pass a bill through the House of Representatives and make it law, right? Because when the voting time comes, I have the majority in the House. If it's a vote of 100 people, we have 55 people, you have 45 people. It's never going to be a question. My side will always take it. Justin Trudeau didn't have that privilege. He had a minority government, which means that when he wants to get past that 50% marker, and I'm just saying 50%, that's not actually the number, but when he wants to get past that 50% threshold to get something passed, he has to strike a deal with somebody else. The Conservatives have a big chunk, the NDP has a big chunk, and the Greens have a small chunk. So who are the Liberals going to work with? Well, Well, this time they chose to work with the NDP. And Jagmeet Singh said, Trudeau, if you want these things passed, you're going to make sure that you give the people CERB. And if you don't give the people CERB, then I guess you really don't want any of your policies getting passed or anything like that. And that gave people $2,000 a month. I didn't get that, but I saw what it did for people who did get it, and it was a huge deal. And that's what happens when you have power divided amongst parties. But we don't always have that, and we definitely don't have that in Ontario. We have a system called First Past the Post. Now, stay with me here. I'm going to do my best to explain it. In researching First Past the Post, I have to admit, it was confusing to wrap my head around how the system worked and why it didn't make sense. Because this isn't something that gets talked enough about on TV. This isn't something that we get educated enough about in school. And so it's not a concept that just kind of rolls off the tongue the way it would for American politics, I'm embarrassed to say. Here's how it works. First past the post comes from horse racing, where horses run past a post, and then the first one past it is the winner. Similarly, when our politicians are running this race, the first person to get the majority of the votes wins. Makes sense. But there's a problem here. Because when you have four parties, the majority of the vote can actually be something as little as 27% or 30% or 40%, which means that even though 60 or 70% of the country did not vote for you, you will still win a majority government. And that is a problem. How does this work? Ontario is divided into 124 ridings. Each riding has an MPP. You've seen a member of provincial parliament. That's what that stands for. And you've seen their flyers and their banners and their door hangers, and maybe they've even come and knock on your door to let you know that they're running. In Ontario and in Canada, we usually don't care about who our MPP or MP is, because a lot of people vote based on the party leader, right? So Doug Ford is the leader of the Provincial Conservative Party. So when you're going to cast your vote in your riding, it almost doesn't matter what the name on there says. You're just going to look for whoever is the conservative member of provincial parliament and vote for them, because you're in your mind, that's a vote for Doug Ford. And you'll do the same if you want to vote for NDP, Liberal, or Green. I'm just using the Conservatives as an example because they just won. For this example, I want us to imagine that Ontario is just one riding. And in this riding, you have four parties running for election. You have the NDP, Conservative, the Green, and the Liberal, just like we do now. And in this scenario that I'm just making up, the Conservative Party wins 35% of the vote. The NDP party maybe wins 22% of the vote. And the Liberal Party wins 28% of the vote. And the Greens win 15% of the vote. Oh my God, can you imagine? That makes up 100%. And in this scenario, the Conservative Party won because they have 35%. First past the post means that this is the winner. Now they are in charge of all of Ontario. The Premier of Ontario has a lot of power. Okay, a lot of power. We're not going to get into all of it now, but it's pretty much whatever they say goes, especially when you have a majority government, which we have just given Ford for the third time. What happens, though, to the rest of the votes? Because if you total them up, way more people voted not for Ford, right? 15% goes to Green, 22% goes to, I think I said NDP, and 28% goes to the Liberal. That means 65% of the Ontario population that voted did not vote for Doug Ford. But he is now in charge of everything. It doesn't make sense. And that's why I'm saying this is a system that's rigged to throw away most votes. So when we're complaining about the situation that we have in Ontario right now, when we're complaining about the horrible crisis in healthcare, when we're complaining about the homelessness situation, when we're complaining about what's happening with inflation and the cost of medicine, and the fact that none of our social services are keeping up with these rising costs, we have to acknowledge that we are giving the keys of the kingdom back to the man who made all of this our reality. How do we fix this? How do we get out of this non-democratic system? Well, the solution is already out there. The solution has been pushed many times for decades, most recently by Jagmeet Singh. I would argue not hard enough, but we'll put that aside to another video. It's called proportional representation. And this is probably the best fix we're going to get for now, because it's one that's already been floated out there. It's one that people have already flirted with the idea of kind of promising. Now let's go back to the one riding scenario I painted for us earlier. 35% of the vote went to Doug Ford, 15% went to the Green Party, Mark Schreiner, 22% went to NDP, and 28% went to the Liberals. In the world where we have proportional representation, that is how those numbers would translate into seats in the House of Representatives. That means that Doug Ford would not have a majority. He would have as much power allocated to him as voters gave him. He would not be able to do things unilaterally without working with the other three bodies, the other three parties. And more importantly, way more importantly, if the other three parties, which represent most of Ontario, wanted to work together, well, then let's just do the math one more time. 15 plus 22 plus 28 is a 65% slam dunk majority. That means that you don't have to listen to a goddamn thing that Doug Ford has to say, because most people did not vote for him. We could have a coalition working together to bring about the most popular policies that Canadians, and in this case specifically Ontario residents, have voted for. And if this was how voting worked, people would go out because your vote means something. But we're stuck. We're stuck in this red, blue, red, blue, red, blue game. And now that we know how it's rigged, we can see why neither party would ever want to change this system, right? Because it's the Conservative Party now. But if it ever changes, what's it going to be? The Liberal Party. And they know that. And the Conservatives know that as soon as it's the Liberal Party and it changes, what's it going to be? Red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. Meanwhile, it's our nurples that are getting purple.
You can keep the money, friend, or you can keep your nurple, but you can't keep both. Not my nurple!
Imagine a scenario where this happened, and where we got to see the combined efforts of NDP, Green, and Liberals come together to bring about really popular policies, funding healthcare better, paying our doctors and nurses so that people don't just get a degree in Canada and take that talent elsewhere because we're not paying them what they're worth. What about investing into clean energy? What about giving people a hope that oil isn't going to be the only way that you can become wealthy in this country? What about not selling Ontario land to every foreign investor that, gives Doug Ford a little wink? And if we had that for 4 years, the next election, people wouldn't even really be considering Liberals. Do you get what I'm saying? Because they would have seen what the NDP and the Green did. And they would see that they are way more in line with what we want as a people. Doug Ford is trying to Americanize Canada, but I think Canadians are really looking for a future like the ones we see in certain European countries. Talking about Finland and Sweden. I think that's what we see as the progression of society, most of us, where the government is working for you, where there is maternity leave and paternity leave, so kids can have mom and dad stay at home without everyone worrying about being broke. A government that isn't just lining the pockets of anybody that is willing to bribe them. Anyhow, I could go on. But another reason that I think we don't really get a difference in the way that we vote and in the outcome of our elections is Canadian media. Canada's a beautiful country, beautifully situated in the globe, lots of cool landscapes, but we have interesting neighbors. Imagine Willy Wonka's chocolate factory if that factory made guns and nuclear weapons. And now the Oompa Loompas are trying to send Canada down the chocolate river. And when news is as sensational as it is at a time like this, our media needs to step up. There is a time for dignity and calm, and there is a time to ring the alarm bells. That time has come. The complacency that people are feeling when it comes to showing up and showing out to vote is reflected in the sort of calm and just chill demeanor that I see from our news media. You're not really conveying to the people how much trouble we're in. And we're in a lot of trouble. And when you're not conveying that, but we know it. And you're not really giving us a clear message that's going to cut through the noise of everything else that's happening around us. That really does make the voice of Doug Ford louder. Because in the absence of anything, something is better than nothing. Somebody has to speak up and say, it's me, I'll do it. I want the job. I'll take it. And he's saying it louder than everybody else. Honestly, we don't have time to strain our ears to listen to the other voice, to listen for the other voices. Because like I said, the time for complacency, the time where that would have just worked, the time where just pointing and laughing at the absurdity of the conservative candidate and just being like, obviously it's going to be liberal, that's come and gone. People are panicking. We have never had to live like this before. And that's not being reflected in Canadian media, which is actually a part of the reason why we even decided to start this channel. Because I'm flabbergasted that this guy won. I'm gobsmacked. I'm not surprised. I'm upset though. And somebody has to say something. And the news coming out of America is sensational and deserves to be monitored closely, but its ripple effects are going to touch us in our no-no places, in our pockets. And somebody needs to talk about that too. Somebody needs to talk about that as well. And it can't just be like, oh, the economy. That man has been in charge for 7 years. How's the economy? How's it for you? How's inflation? How is it getting to work? How is it taking the TTC? How is it going to the doctor? How many of you even have a doctor? How is it going to the hospital? What's it even like working at the hospital right now? I can't even imagine how we're going to hire more healthcare workers when I don't even see a way for us to keep the ones we have with the frigging things that we're putting them through. And the urgency of the situation is not being made clear. And that's not fair. You have to let people know that we're cooked. And right now we just set the timer for 4 more years with this guy. So tune in, like it if you liked it. Please subscribe. We are Bred in Captivity News, an unfiltered look from a Canadian perspective at what's going on in the world. Peace.